Hey, what is happening, everybody? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today I want to discuss a little bit of what I think Nintendo might be planning for Nintendo Directs in 2021. So right now, it is the morning of November 12th, 2020, which means that it is the very day that the PlayStation 5 launches to most of the world. There are some territories that are getting it next week, but of course, in North America, here where I live, it is coming out today. The Xbox Series X launched earlier in the week, and so the next generation is here. Sony and Microsoft bringing a new generation of consoles to the world. I am currently waiting on my PlayStation 5 to arrive from Amazon anytime now. It's on its shipment status, like it's somewhere in my neighborhood or in my state, so I should have it by the end of the day. But, of course, with Sony and Microsoft kicking off the next generation this week, we do also wonder about Nintendo, which you guys know we mostly cover and talk about here on Rule of Two Review. My personal favorite company. The Switch is my favorite console on the market right now. Maybe PS5 or Series X changes that. We'll have to wait and see, but we're kind of getting into, apples and oranges there. A little bit harder to compare one-to-one once you start going from one generation to a new generation. And so with them kicking off the next generation, what is Nintendo's role, and more specifically, their Nintendo Direct overall strategy that has been so successful for them until 2020 with the pandemic? Is there a chance that they try to regain some of the spotlight in 2021 by coming back to a more traditional Nintendo Direct format? Before I dive too much deeper into the Nintendo Direct thing, I do want to remind you that I am trying really hard to cross 15,000 subscribers on the channel before the end of the year. We've got about a month and a half to go. I'm running out of time. I've got a little over 300 subscribers to still go. I doubt that I'm going to get there by the end of the year, which is okay, but I'm still going to try. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing, then maybe consider subscribing to the channel and help me cross that milestone before the year is over. So Nintendo Directs have been the tried and true marketing and messaging format that Nintendo has been doing since 2011, you guys. Can you believe it was 2011, back when the 3DS was brand new and getting ready to launch? And even before the Wii U was a console, the Wii was still Nintendo's main home machine at that time. And that's when Nintendo Direct started, and it's been a rocky road for a while. It might be hard for a lot of us to remember, especially some of you younger guys and girls out there, to even remember what Nintendo Directs were like the first couple of years, because people had such high expectations and high demands for Nintendo Directs that there wasn't much of a hype cycle. It was more of waiting to see how disappointing it would be. I really never felt that way for the most part. I mean, I'm human, so I would be disappointed in the occasional Direct, sure, but I wasn't really somebody who wasn't ever excited for them. In general, though, the overall vibe for a while was that people were just constantly let down. They always wanted something as big and exciting as E3, and when they were newer, people were still adjusting to what they were supposed to be, so it was much harder for people to just accept them for what they were. But the last, I would say, 4 or 5 maybe years, people started to really kind of settle into what they are and really accept them for the kind of cool thing that they were. Now, like I said in the beginning here, we all know 2020 introduced the stupid pandemic, which changed everything for the entire world, every single country, every single industry, and in the video game space, it obviously affected most of the big players there, which includes Nintendo. And one of the things we saw Nintendo kind of adjust for the sake of the pandemic in 2020 was Nintendo Directs, right? We haven't really gotten traditional Nintendo Directs. We did get, the game-specific Animal Crossing Direct. We've had a couple of Smash Brother Direct type things. Starting in July through October, we got the partner presentations, which also was a rocky road. First 2 weren't very well received. The last 2 were much better and much more well received. And we've also seen Nintendo kind of step into the Twitter situation where they've kind of announced a couple of big games on Twitter and on YouTube by just putting trailers out there. Paper Mario and Hyrule Warriors come to mind, Pikmin 3 Deluxe, of games that really were just like, hey, here's a tweet that we're making Pikmin 3 Deluxe, we're making Paper Mario Origami King, Hyrule Warriors, They started doing stuff so differently than we were used to seeing. It was a sign that Nintendo was making major changes because of this whole situation. Also, at an investors meeting over the summer, Furukawa talked about the fact that Nintendo was considering maybe moving on from traditional Nintendo Directs or changing their direct or messaging format, making a statement, and I'm going to paraphrase here, making a statement that Directs had been really successful for a long time for Nintendo, but they're now open to the idea of moving on from them in the future. So it wasn't a hard and fast commitment to move on from Nintendo Directs, and they weren't telling us that they were going away. In fact, more Direct Minis happened after he even said this statement. But it was interesting to hear Nintendo openly say that they are, again, open, quote unquote, open to moving on or changing the Direct format. So that had a lot of people wondering and guessing what Nintendo was going to be doing. We were only halfway through the year at that time, so, another 5 or 6 months of 2020 still ahead meant that most of us weren't sure what to expect. And a lot of us still thought there was a chance we were going to get a regular Nintendo Direct before the year is over. Now we're here halfway through November. We've got 5 or 6 weeks to go before the year is over, so at this point, I think most of us have ruled out the idea of a future Nintendo Direct in 2020. But that also means that January 1st, 2021 is also right around the corner. So once we hit the new year, do we see Nintendo revert back to their old ways? So obviously this is hard to predict and say one way or another. It would be very easy to say no, they're never going to do it again, or yes, they're going to start it beginning in January. My personal feeling and theory, you guys, and it's only mine based on just my gut feeling, nothing else, is that, yes, I actually do think that sometime next year we are going to see Nintendo come back to the traditional Direct format, right? Obviously, the pandemic will still be an issue going into the beginning of the year, but, we're starting to hear some things that maybe makes us feel like the end could be somewhere in the near future, 5, 6, 8 months down the road, where most people are, maybe not having to worry about it anymore, let's say. I don't want to go too deep into that stuff, but things could be changing early in 2021, and if that happens, that also could bring a lot of the video game industry back to its norm. There's even a chance we get E3, like the regular in-person E3 happening by June next year. Let's not get too excited about that happening, but right now, there is a window of possibility that happens. And if something like that can happen by summer next year, then I think Nintendo going back to regular Directs could also happen. And I'm just, again, telling you my opinion, but I feel like Nintendo is going to want to do that. And I think for me, the main reason I feel so confident that Nintendo will start regular Directs again in 2021 is simply because I think they're just too effective. And I think that Nintendo knows they're too effective as well. Even though they did say that, yes, they're open to moving on from them, they've been great in the past, but maybe it's time to try something new and different. I get that, and I'm sure that eventually it will happen. There's no reason to think that Nintendo will never move on from Nintendo Directs, whether it's next year, whether it's the year after, whether it's 10 years from now. Yeah, at some point, Nintendo will probably change the Nintendo Direct thing. It's going to happen. But I just don't think it's quite yet. Even with these quotes over the summer at that investors meeting, I just have a feeling like Nintendo knows there's too much value in Nintendo Directs. The culture around them is still so strong. The hype cycle around them, the expectations, people's reactions. I do think they help sell video games. It's just, I don't know, too much value I see in Nintendo Directs for Nintendo to want to move on so soon after everything gets back to normal. I think that's another thing too, is if we go on the assumption that in 2021 things get back to close to normal, I feel like one of the easiest ways for Nintendo to continue some of the positive momentum coming off of the pandemic would be to go to something safe and easy, which is what you've always done. Give us Nintendo Directs every 3, 4, or 5 months, several times a year, keep people excited and engaged, and within that rotating hype cycle, at least for a year or two, coming off of the quote-unquote end of the pandemic, I think Nintendo will also see value in that. Trying to immediately shake things up and change things up as things start to get back to normal could certainly work out for them, but I think could also be very risky, and I would bet that Nintendo feels like it might be risky as well. Again, this is only me as a fan, and a 40-year-old gamer guessing, but I feel pretty good about my guesses and my gut feeling here, and so I just think that there's no reason not to expect regular Nintendo Directs to start sometime next year. Now, of course, the last thing we really want to wonder about is when it would happen. If Nintendo plans to do regular Nintendo Directs in 2021, when would be the time that they would do it? Would it be right away in January or February like we've seen in the past? Or would they wait more towards spring or early summer around E3 time? Would they wait until after E3? Obviously, part of it could have to do with when this aid to the pandemic starts to get out to most of the world and people in North America, UK, and Japan and all that stuff. So the ending of the pandemic, if we get to that point earlier in the year, yes, that could help. But even if that takes longer than a lot of us think it might, maybe it takes until near the end of the year again, like around the holiday time, I still think that Nintendo might hopefully be organized enough after all of us living in this situation for so long that they might have a scheme and an infrastructure in place to sort of get back to the regular direct cycle. And how do they film them? How do they put them together? Do they understand release dates? Is there less of a threat of games being delayed because of the pandemic? I think that was a huge part of why we didn't see directs in 2020 is whether or not games can even stick to their committed release dates. And I think that, most of the industry is kind of close to firing on all cylinders again after living this way for so long. And by the time we get to 5-6 months down the road in early 2021, everyone will be that much more efficient, including Nintendo. And so, I don't know, if I was going to just kind of put a semi-safe guess here, I'm going to say around March, right? So I'm going to say around March, give or take, is when we might see the first regular Nintendo Direct. If my theory and guessing today is true, and Nintendo plans to do it, they haven't completely written Directs off and they want to get back to them next year. If that's true, I think that March window is the ideal time to maybe see the first one. I mean, we'd all love the surprise and see like January 10th, right? Right, just a week into the new year, we get a regular Nintendo Direct. How much hype would that be to set up the crazy 2021 we expect them to have? But that might still be too early, so I'm going to go a little bit safer and just shoot for March. So if I was going to make the hard prediction, that's what it is. So anyway, those are my thoughts. That's what's going on and what I have to say about Nintendo's potential future Nintendo Direct plans in 2021, given the whole health crisis thing we've all been living in. And it'll be very fun to see what actually happens next year, and fingers crossed that Nintendo does plan to come back to them. Again, this is all my own theories and guessing, so I could be wrong. I might have spent 15 minutes talking to you guys about something that never happens. But I just don't think that's the case, man. I mean, I feel like most of us would expect Directs to come back sometime next year, right? So, I mean, that's what I want to hear from you guys. Do you agree with my theories that, yes, they're going to start doing them again next year? Or do you think the opposite? Maybe you believe that they are done and the pandemic changed things to such a degree that Nintendo realized they never need to do them again, and maybe they try something wholly new next year in 2021. I mean, anything is possible, man, but I'm going to stick to my prediction for now. Tell me what you guys think, and with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob over with 2 Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.